Thank you guys for joining us this week on the Encouragers class. My name is David England, and what a great pleasure to be joining you this week. And what a lesson we have for you. The prodigal son, the return of the son to the father, and to be able to come forth to a father even after so many hurtful and painful and wronged betrayals. And we look here at the prodigal son, and we'll start in Luke chapter 15, verse 11, which says, "He also said a man had two sons." So what we see here is an establishment that there are two sons living together. And you can imagine with two sons, there are probably issues between the two. There's probably some qualms and some quarrels. There's some issues that happen, but you can imagine they love each other because the great father that they have that portrays something that we'll get to a little bit later in this lesson. And then you look at verse 12 and it says, "The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the estate I have coming to me.' So he distributed the assets to them." And what we see here is that the one son becomes selfish. You can imagine he wants to live on his own. He wants to finally move out of the house, have the freedom of no longer being under the bondage of the father. He wants to be able to escape, move away, not have to worry about the worries of being under the dad's rules or the extremes to be fulfilled in the house that have to be done. There's no more chores. If I can just get my estate and move out, everything will be great. There will be no worries. There will be no issues. And what we see here is that the father does something incredible later on in this lesson. And what happens, though, going back to the son, is the son says, "I'm going to move out. Give me my share of the estate." And this was something that was never done in that day, or rarely ever done, because it was a disrespect to the father. The father normally would pass on, and then the estate, the inheritance will be passed out. It will be given on. But what we see here is that the son rushes this to a point where he says, "I'm ready now to receive what's coming to me. I believe I've earned the right to have my estate early, so go ahead and give it to me." But we see something very familiar in the plane of our lives as humans that happens here when we rush the timing of the Father. And when we rush the timing of the one that sits on the throne, the one that sustains our breath, the creator of the universe. And what we see here in verse 13 is not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled into a distant country where he squandered his estate in foolish living. So you can imagine it. The son's finally got his money. He's finally moving on. He says, "I'm done. I'm done with the house. I'm done with my dad. I'm done with my brother. Everything's going to be great." And he moves on in his life, and now he's got the money. Now he's got what he's been longing for. He's got the possessions. So you can imagine, even in that day, there's some partying going on. Some great things are happening. He's living the life, the quote-unquote life. Great things are happening. He's probably getting some women, which he's enjoying. Life seems to be going the direction he's always wanted it to go. If it was in modern day times, he would have his dream car. He would have his dream house he was living in. Everything would be the way he wanted it and the way he dreamed it. But we look at something in the latter part of verse 13 that's very interesting. And in verse 13 it says this, "Where he squandered his estate in foolish living." So what happens is the son moves out knowing the rules that the father had, knowing the father had poured into him about what life was about, knowing good and well that he was not going to be able to spend this money at the rate that the father said he was going to spend it at. And we look at it here and something interesting happens. There's no longer any more money. There's no longer any more material possessions. There's brokenness. There's hurt. He feels like there's no way out. He's trapped. There's no way to come back. He's squandered his living. Which basically means he's had everything that he wanted was in his hands is now gone because the money's gone. So now the friends are gone. And now more than likely, the women that came into his life for the money, they're gone. And now you can imagine he's sitting around and he's going, maybe this wasn't all it was cracked up to be. Maybe I left too early. So it probably starts to creep in his mind. And then we look at verse 14 and something amazing happens. After he had spent everything, a severe famine struck that country and he had nothing. How familiar is this in our lives? We leave the Father, we leave His love, His mercy, His grace, and we go and do our own thing, and that's the sin world. We step out in sin and we go, this is going to be everything I've always dreamed it was going to be. And we step out into the world and we step out into sin and we say, this is everything I've ever longed for. And then it hits. And what happens here is a severe famine strikes the country. And the severe famine takes him by storm. And he's not ready because the money's not there because of the stupid, squandered living he had spent. His money is gone. He has nowhere to go. The hurt is so deep and the pain is so unreal. He feels like he can't handle it anymore. And what happens and what we see here in this chapter is that the Father is showing God sent this famine at the perfect time to make him realize where he was at in his life. To make him realize that you're not where you want to be. You're not surrounded by my love and my mercy and my grace. You're not surrounded by my forgiveness. You went off. You went on your own. And God allows us to do that for a season. He says, I'm going to allow you to live how you want to live, even if it's not by the way I want you to live, because I have mercy and grace on you. You're not robots. You're humans. And I love you, and I sent my Son to die for you, but I'm going to let you go on your own path. And he goes on his own path, and he moves out of the house. He squanders his living. He blows the money, and then a famine hits. What terrible timing for a famine to hit. He doesn't have anything. It's gone. There's nothing else to live for. But he's got to do something. Because going back to the Father is not an option at this point. Because I was selfish. And my dad's going to look at me like I don't deserve to come back. And the shame and the guilt that would be there for going back to the Father. And then we look at verse 15, and it says, Then he went to work for one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. Well, we said it couldn't get any worse earlier, it did. Not only did the famine strike, not only was the money not there, not only is there shame and brokenness that's already there, now there's being ashamed for having to feed pigs, and this was the worst of the worst in that day. Feeding pigs was the equivalent nowadays of having to go in and clean bathrooms every day for the rest of your life to make a living. It's not what you dream of doing. It's not your dream job. You don't set out to feed pigs in this day. But he has to do it because he's hit rock bottom and he's scrambling. And he says, I got to find something. There's got to be joy somewhere. And how often do we do that in our lives? We leave from the presence of God and we say, there's got to be joy somewhere. Let me scramble. Let me try to find some things. So we finally get the money and we say, that's going to be it. This is what I've always dreamed of. And we get the money and we say, that's not it. And then a famine hits or a trial comes. And we say, I can't do anything else. But we have to try to survive and we have to try to make it. So we scramble. We try to find things that can fulfill that void that we had when we were with the Father. And we look at it here in verse 15, and it says, he went to work for one of the citizens of that country. Now, more than likely, this was a Jewish person working for a Gentile, which was already bad enough as it was anyway. But then he has to feed pigs. But look at verse 16. He longed to eat his fill from the carob pods the pigs were eating, but no one would give him any. He now has reached the point that none of us say we'll ever get to in life. He's reached the point of having to eat out of the pig trough because he's so hungry. He's longing for something. And this is not a picture of the son being hungry. This is a picture of the son desiring something so bad in his heart that he's going to go to any measure to get it. And it's fulfillment, and it's joy, and it's love, and it's longing. Because he's broken and he's hurt. And he said, there's no way I can go back to the Father. So I got to find something. Let me eat out of this pig trough. Let me have something because I'm starving. Let me have something. I'm begging you, but no one would give him anything. Then we're going to go one verse farther. We look at verse 17. When he came to his senses, when the realization set in, I don't have any other option. I've got to think of the unthinkable. I've got to do the unthinkable. I've got to set out to do something that I said I'll never do when I leave the Father's presence. And that's what we're going to get into in the next lesson, is what happens from verse 17 on. And the glorious redemption comes for the Son. And what we see here is that there's love unimaginable, and there's forgiveness unimaginable, and there's grace that cannot be described in human words. Thank you guys for joining me this week on the Encouragers class. I look forward to teaching the next lesson. It'll go up shortly. Have a great week, and God bless.